Nature's information storage let us go back now to the sheet of ice we lifted from the pan and find a proper light source to illuminate it. We shall find to our great surprise that we can see the three pebbles suspended in midair if we look through the ice toward the light. They will look very three-dimensional to us. This is a totally unexpected result. It seems that the rippled surface of the ice, or the interference pattern, has somehow stored the information about the whereabouts and the shape of the pebbles. The ice surface acted as a distorted lens in such a way as to focus the light to points taken up by the pebbles that have caused all these ripples. The chaotic-looking ice surface is actually an information storage device. Suppose now that due to a momentary gap in attention or plain clumsiness, this ice sheet slips out of our hands, drops on the floor, and breaks. We sadly collect the pieces, but before throwing them all out, we hold up one of them and illuminate it the same way as we did the large sheet. To our great surprise, we find the three pebbles again projected in midair, Fig 9a. But how come? You may remember that the information about the whereabouts of each pebble was carried by the waves moving to the edge of the pan. We know if we drop just a single pebble into the pan, it would be very easy for us to locate it. We would simply seek out the center of the concentric wave rings or wave fronts. We know also that the waves from each pebble cross the face of the whole pan. Naturally, they must have interacted with each other across the whole surface of the pan on every square centimeter of its surface. We can show it like this. The arcs created by each pebble are crossing a small piece of the surface, and each arc can be traced back to its origin, Fig 9b. This is the basic principle of the hologram. However, I would not recommend that you actually try to perform the experiment just described. It will not work in practice for certain complicated technical reasons which we shall bypass. But it is perfectly useful for the purpose of explaining the workings of the most exciting information storage device, the hologram. It is nature's way of storing information. There is already evidence that our brains store information in a holographic form. This kind of storage device is the most compact known in nature. An example of this is the genetic code carried in our chromosomes. Each cell in our bodies carries all the information required to make an additional copy of our bodies. Our success in storing information in the system just described depends, naturally, on the predictable and orderly behavior of the waves in the pan. They must be consistent both in velocity and in distance between the waves or wavelengths. This is what makes them reliable as carriers of information. Otherwise, all we would get is a hodgepodge of waves. Here is where coherency comes in. Coherency, it would be good at this point to describe the way a real hologram is made so that you become familiar with this import and concept. By coherency, we mean an order of a certain kind. In this case, we shall talk about coherent light, without which a good hologram cannot be made. The most popular source of coherent light is a laser. The first important aspect of laser light is that it produces light of a single frequency. We all know that our sun sends us light that can be broken down by a prism into a spectrum containing all the colors of the rainbow. A laser produces light of just a single color from that rainbow, which we call monochromatic light. In addition, the light emitted by the laser is coherent or goes in step. By that, we mean that all the light coming out of the source is moving forward in even, flat fronts. This makes it possible for the laser light to stay in a narrow beam over very large distances. There is a better way to describe coherency. Suppose we have a parade and a company of soldiers marching in military fashion down a main street. They are moving along, 10 abreast, very carefully aligned in each row. The distances between the rows are fixed, which is analogous to the even distances between the crests of light waves. That they are carefully aligned abreast, none of them sticking out of the line, is analogous to the light being in phase or in step. In short, the row of soldiers is analogous to the light emitted by the laser beam. Suppose now that a slip-up occurs and one of the soldiers, not watching his fellows, shifts out of his row, moves forward, and steps on the heel of the fellow in front of him. The latter panics, thinking that he is lagging behind, and he jumps forward and bumps into the fellow ahead of him. Now this starts a general panic in which soldiers bumping into each other disrupt the nice even width of the moving column. The neat column diverges, broadens, then opens up completely in great disorder, in spite of the fact that their commander is blowing his whistle, tearing at his hair, and using strong language to get his men back into line. What we have learned from this disastrous parade is that a beam of light can stay in a narrow beam similar to a laser S-beam only as long as it is coherent. When coherency is lost, the beam will tend to expand rapidly, just as will the beam of a regular flashlight. The hologram we have seen before that information can be stored by an interference pattern of waves. To have interference, we must have at least two interacting components, and here is how it is done. The laser light beam is split into two components by a half mirror, that is, a semi-transparent mirror. This allows part of the beam to continue undisturbed, while part of it is deflected to another mirror. Both narrow beams are spread open by lenses. The upper beam, which we shall call the reference beam, arrives at a photographic plate after an eventless flight, since no event of note has occurred on its way to the plate. It proceeds then to deposit its imprint on the film. The other half of the beam we shall call the working beam. This beam's trip had an event. It had encountered on its way an object, in this case an apple, that it had illuminated and with which it had interacted. We don't consider encounters through mirrors and lenses as worthwhile talking about. The working beam will then be reflected from the apple and fall on the film. There, it will meet its twin, the reference beam, and will tell it all about its experiences with the apple. Neither of them suspect that their interaction is being recorded on film. The interaction between the two beams will cause ripples to form between them, which will form the interference pattern we are already familiar with, since the light waves will behave in this case the same way as do water waves. However, these ripples do not at all resemble the shape of the apple, but as we already know, the ripples in the photographic emulsion do contain information, and that information can be elicited from the film by illuminating the exposed film with the same light used in making the hologram. As we do that, we shall see the apple appear suspended in midair and looking very three-dimensional and real. We could be easily deceived when viewing an image reconstructed from a hologram that we were seeing the actual object. Note that the important part of holographic image making is the interaction of a reference beam, a beam that is pure, virgin, and untouched with a working beam, which has had some experiences in its life. The magnitude of these experiences is being measured against the reference beam, which serves as a baseline for comparison. Our whole reality is constructed by constantly making such comparisons. Our senses, which describe our reality to us, are making these comparisons all the time. Unfortunately, our senses, having no absolute reference line, must generate their own relative reference line. But whenever we perceive something, we always perceive differences only. It would be useful to take one example from nature to see how such differences are put to use in a very obvious way. Take the bat, for instance. We all know that this little mouse-like fellow lives on insects he catches in flight. Since he is active at night, he has developed a sonar-like device that serves him very well and enables him to make a reasonably easy living. He has highly specialized structures in his head that allow him to emit a very high-frequency sound and to direct it in a fairly narrow beam. This is his reference beam. As this beam encounters a flying insect, some of this sound will be reflected back to the bat. He picks up this echo, or we can call it the working beam, and compares it to his original squeak or chirp. There will be a difference between the two called the Doppler effect, and this difference tells the bat how far away the insect is and how fast it is hieing relative to him. As the bat successfully closes in on the insect, the difference between the two frequencies, the emitted frequency and the echo, diminishes. When it becomes very small, the bat opens its mouth and swallows the echo. Some echoes, as the bat surely knows, are tastier than others. We see now that by appreciating the difference between two sounds or vibrations, one can get along quite well in life. There are many creatures that make a living by appreciating differences in sound: porpoises, whales, and many others. We humans also utilize this technique.